Welcome to Bedtime Stories. Please make sure you subscribe to get notified of new stories and, of course, share them with a friend. And now, the tale of Peter Rabbit. Once upon a time there were 4 little rabbits. Their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put into a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into any mischief. I'm going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took her basket and her umbrella and went through the forest to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 bread rolls. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First he ate some lettuce and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But around the end of the cucumber frame, who should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees, planting out young cabbages. But he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. Running around the garden, he lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe near the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether, had he not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net, and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for loss and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to try harder. Mr. McGregor came up with a basket, which he intended to drop on top of Peter. But Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him. And Peter rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a watering can. It would have been a beautiful place to hide, if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hiding underneath a flower pot. He began turning them over carefully, looking under each one. Then Peter sneezed, "Kerchoo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time, and tried to put his foot on Peter, who jumped out a window, knocking over 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter, so he went back to work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp from sitting in that water can. After a time, he began to wander about, not very fast, just looking around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she couldn't answer. She only shook her head at him, and he began to cry. He tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Then he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his watering cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail would twitch as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes. But then, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor, hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could along a straight walk behind some bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him around the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last, in the woods outside the garden. Mr. McGregor went back to work. He hung up the little jacket and shoes for a scarecrow to frighten off blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him until he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down on the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She had wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in 2 weeks. I'm sorry to say that Peter was not feeling well that evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea. 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, they had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. Thank you for listening to Bedtime Stories. Please make sure you subscribe to follow us for new stories and forward them to a friend. If you have a suggestion for a new story, send us an email, magicmonorail@gmail.com. Until next time, good night. Would you like to make a podcast? Spotify has a way to let you make one easily, distribute it everywhere, and even earn money, all in one place, for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit right from your phone or computer, so you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. And video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free. You know, ever since I discovered Spotify for Podcasters, I've enjoyed sharing my favorite stories with children around the world. If you've ever thought of starting your own podcast, download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to spotify.com/podcasters to get started.